Please welcome Stephanie Strom, Adam Howell, Bruce Rominger, and Ricardo Salvador.
Who are still here must be sick of seeing me, but thanks. I'm glad you stuck around for this. It's a great opportunity to talk to and hear from two real, what I call real honest to God farmers. We've got Adam here and Bruce and Ricardo, who is going to kind of set the stage for us and tell us, Ricardo, why is it important for us to be having a discussion about what farmers should grow? I mean, we don't tell food manufacturers what they should make or restaurants what they should serve. Why should we be able to tell farmers like these what they should grow?
Yeah, well, that's actually not a premise that I share,
okay.
And I'll be interested in knowing how it feels like to you folks that actually do the farming. I do think that there is a case to be made for those farmers that are program farmers that actually receive federal support, so tax dollars. There's a case to be made in terms of what that public investment ought to be getting us. And I think that the sorts of things that we've talked about at the conference, which basically have to do with a range of environmental benefits that we would like to see, social benefits that we would like to see, diversity and health in the food supply and so on, are things that we would reasonably expect out of the food system. However, I expect that in the discussion we'll get into some of the complexities of that, because the way that it looks like to a farmer, of course, is translated through a market and to the ways that they cover risk, and all of those determine the choices that are actually realistic for them. So let's get into that discussion.
Yeah,
and then.
So Adam and Bruce, I don't know, you can choose among yourselves. Who wants to go first? Tell us a little bit about your farms. I mean, how long have you been farming? Are you family farmers? And why do you grow what you grow?
I'm from Sacramento Valley in California. My family's been there basically since the gold rush, so I'm fifth generation. I've been farming since I got out of school in 1980, so whatever, 35 years, something like that. And it's a very diversified row crop operation. My brother and I have maybe about 3,000 acres or so of irrigated land and some rangeland also. And we are very diverse. We have 10 different crops or so every year, and that's kind of the way we mitigate our risk.
Always the same 10? Or?
No, it varies. We look at markets. We look at availability of contracts. We look at what our water situation is.
So what are you growing like this time around that you may not have been growing 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a couple of seed crops that have become available with contracts in our area, but if you look back 40 years, the crop pattern is quite different. I wouldn't be in business if I tried to farm the way my grandfather or my father did. They had different crops then. You have to constantly adapt. We're planting some new crops right now that we've never had before, but
like what?
Well, we're planting some trees, so we're getting into the orchard development. And 20 years from now, I expect my children to be looking at different things to plant also. If you don't adapt, you're going to be done. It's constantly evolving, and you have to keep up with the markets. And now we have to look at the climate as one of those factors.
Okay. And Adam?
We, my family and I farm in east central Indiana, which would be right in the eastern corn belt. We raise the traditional, for the area, corn and soybeans. We also raise pumpkins and processing tomatoes. Our particular family farm is a second generation family farm. My parents started it. It's now my parents and my brother and I that are full-time involved. But the family has farmed for generations prior to that in the same general area.
You were telling me a little bit earlier, what is the farm growing, what did the farm grow when you were growing up on it versus what you're growing today, and why did that evolution happen?
Well, we were, I guess, we were local produce and fresh produce before it was cool. I grew up, and along with my siblings, we raised apples and green beans and sweet corn and fresh market tomatoes and any long list of vegetable crops, and we marketed most of those through either small scale wholesale, there locally, or our own retail farm markets. And I was telling Stephanie earlier that the market does work. That was before the current movement, and there was really a movement towards convenience, towards the large retailers had improved their produce departments, and they could go get laundry detergent and diapers and a good looking apple right there in the same place, where they couldn't get that at our farm. So the market basically made us make the decision to get out of that, focus on a few more scalable crops, and now we're, I guess we could get into that a little bit later, but slightly open to the idea of returning because of the current market situations. So,
how much does climate change play a role in your decision making and your businesses in a way that maybe it didn't 20 years ago?
It's very difficult to make a cropping decision based on a long-term trend that's going in one direction. We mitigate risk by the diversity we have. And so we have crops that if this climate change continues, the temperature rises, it probably won't work very well in our area in 10, 20, 30 years, I'm not sure. We have other ones that may do better. We're not sure. But as long as you have 10 crops, you're looking at those every year. I think that's the way we're handling it. People ask me this for several years now. I can't think of a specific decision I've made about, it's going to be a little hotter next year, I'm not going to do this. Those increments are so small in the area, and I'm also irrigated agriculture. Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about necessarily, I know ahead of time whether my well's going to have enough or if I'm going to have enough water for that season. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to make that much difference. If it's a degree hotter, I'm still going to be able to grow my tomatoes.
So Ricardo, then how do we get this shift that we need going if, again, it seems like, oh my God, it's a 20-year trajectory. I have to plant for next season. How do you get it?
Well, exactly that way. I think that market incentives for the sorts of things that we are expecting out of our food system need to align with the possibilities that farmers actually have to meet the objectives. And so, for instance, if we get really concrete,
please.
One of the objectives that we have is to clean up the nation's surface waters, where we really have a situation where there is crisis, particularly throughout the Midwest in terms of the quality of surface water. There are huge problems in certain areas with sedimentation and erosion. You lost one of the treasures of this nation. It is worthwhile remembering that the natural capital of the Midwest in particular really should be to this nation the way that oil is to the Middle East. Mm-hmm. It is the wealth upon which the agricultural well-being of the nation was founded originally. So those things need to be controlled. But as we heard this morning from Paul Krugman, those are prices that nobody is paying. They're externalized so that the rest of us are paying them tax dollars when we need to dredge rivers, when we need to clean up water supplies, public water supplies, and so on. The interesting thing about this is that any farmer, and here let me preface this by referencing the very nice taxonomy of farmers that Secretary Vilsack gave us, which is really important to remember any time that we tend to generalize about the very diverse farming population. So for purposes of what I'm about to mention, I'd like to focus on those 300,000 farmers that he mentioned that by definition would be those that are farming large acres. We're using lots of terms loosely here, but the large commercial farmers that make up the lion's share, the proportion
so would that be
of
Adam
the
and
food
Bruce?
supply. It would include these folks,
Okay.
yeah, from what I would understand. Now, these are generalizations. So you should know I met these people 10 minutes ago, so I'm not going to make any assumptions. As a matter of fact, I know more about your operation, Bruce, than I know about yours, Adam. So I'm not referring specifically to anyone here. But I think the point that I was going to make was that any given farmer, because of the nature of those two problems that I mentioned, can look at you straight in the eye and tell you that they individually are not responsible for those problems, say hypoxia. And they would be absolutely right. No single farmer is responsible for that. These are aggregate sorts of things that accumulate out there. We have no market mechanism right now to deal with that, and so it is a totally, completely unaccounted cost. And so then what? Then we just say, so then, particularly because we're investing in this system, we're covering the risk of people that are participating in federal programs, then I think that it is appropriate to work with farmers, not to impose, but to work with farmers to come up with reasonable ways that then working together, and that's not just advocates, that means farmers working together in watersheds, at the scale that it will take to actually effectively address these issues, can actually change practices so that then we begin to eliminate these problems, rather than just perpetually observe that there's a market failure, that we're not pricing these things.
Well, so that's happened, right, to some extent in the Chesapeake Bay area with poultry farming, right?
Yeah, very nice
so
example.
It's not like we haven't done it a little bit.
Like we're not capable of doing it, right?
Yeah. From Bruce and Adams, how much do you think, when you're deciding what you're going to grow and what you're going to do with your farms, how much of a role do federal or public policies play in addition to market forces to motivating you to move one way or the other?
Go ahead.
Well, when we're comparing corn and soybeans, under the current program, it has very little influence from one commodity crop to the other. And I can't speak intelligently to rice and cotton and wheat. Corn and soybeans are really our commodity crop options where we are. But the current program really doesn't favor one or the other of those. I would say that it is a minor discouragement, actually, to the diversification that we have. I don't know about Bruce, but fairly minor. And the one that I would point to is crop insurance. In the case of tomato, we have a very good system of subsidized crop insurance for the program crops. In the case of tomatoes, the private market has addressed that.
Right.
With our particular processor. Our processor has recognized that was a way that they needed to compete to gain to retain acres in the areas that they needed them, and they rolled out their own insurance program that was very competitive with.
So it was a private insurance program. Okay, that's interesting.
The commodity programs are a pretty small factor in what we do. The commodity crops that we participate in the government program really are rotation crops. They're not our cash crops.
Okay.
So we're really growing those as part of our rotation to have our land healthier, to be diversified in preparation for higher value crops. So they don't make a significant difference to us. There's so many other factors that are important in what we grow besides, the little bit. Now the insurance is helpful, and so it does make a little difference. And I agree with Ricardo in the fact that I think it's perfectly fine for the public dollars to be tweaked in a way that steers agricultural choices in a better environmental direction. The difficulty is how do you do that and who decides? Because what works in the Midwest is not going to be appropriate from where I am. It's not going to be appropriate in Florida. So it's a very difficult thing to do. I agree that the system we have is really not doing what we want it to do as far as the commodity programs are right now. It's not for the best benefit of the country, but it's not that easy to change these sort of things and come up with what the best solution is. So it's something that farmers, I think for the most part, even if the corn, soybean people I've talked to, and I don't know what Adam's feelings are about this, is most people want to do the right thing. You would like to change. You would like to have that third rotation option. But the reality is, those are the crops that are suited for your climate, that you have a market for, that you have a processor for, and you can't just turn around and start doing something else.
Right.
These are family businesses that have been doing this for a long, long time. People rely on it, make their living on it. The industry, local industry depends on it. It's something that's going to take a long time to shift. We need to do it gently. I don't think we want a lot of family farmers to go out of business, because what happens is that ground still gets farmed. So you have fewer, bigger farmers. And I don't know that that's the answer to what we want to do. So there is a good reason, I think, in this country to have some supports to mitigate risk for agriculture, for producers, because we don't want fewer farmers. We want to maintain what we have and hopefully have more farmers, smaller farmers. And that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Adam, I see you want to say something, so don't let me cut you off.
Well, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important to point out the big versus the corporate versus family farm. And Ricardo mentioned that we would fall into the
Big farm.
big farm.
Yeah.
In fact, to be perfectly open and frank, our farm would be in the largest 1%. And I think when those statistics skew things a little bit in the public perception. So you folks out here, the largest 1%, probably your mind goes to corporate ag or big business, where in fact it's a mother and father and two brothers that make up that
That's
farm.
the corporation.
We are a family farm, the truest sense of the word. All three families are supported entirely by farm income, and so that's enough on that. But.
Yeah.
So we've got a little bit of time, but I want to ask you, Adam, you said you were sort of beginning to think about moving more of, you said you have about 1,100 acres in pumpkins and tomatoes, right? And you were thinking about maybe even moving more into more of those kinds of crops, the crops that are now, the consumers seem to want more. What would it take to get you to actually make that move?
Well, for our business, it's that opportunity to scale it up. I think if we were going to have something to take to the farmers market or to our own
Co-op.
retail establishment or something, that would be such a small piece of our business and such a different type of business that it's almost a standalone deal. So if we want to do what we want to accomplish with additional crops, it needs to be something that's scalable. And we're interested in we've diversified intentionally into non-commodity crops for price risk reasons and those sorts of things. Now we, after some weather events, we see, what about the next diversification being in more of a controlled climate diversification, diversify away from some of the weather risks. So what are our opportunities there? Greenhouses or CAFOs. I personally would love to have a confined feeding operation because of the efficiency of the manure. It couples well with the crop production that we do. But the market is working, and market and public opinion is working, because that's, as much as I would like to do that, and as much as I think it would make agronomic and economic sense, I don't want to touch it. I think the greenhouses and being able to market things to retailers and let them sell at retail, but as locally grown, Midwest raised, possibly even sustainable, organic, out of a greenhouse, I think that's a much more viable
We're going to see you in
option.
Whole Foods Market soon.
We'll see.
All right, so we've really, I promised I would stick to time. We have 2 minutes for questions. Anybody have a question?
Back there.
I can't see back there.
Just a question about the efficiency of production. So one of the things we've heard about some is, some technology for, making production more efficient, kind of putting that on the farm. When you look at kind of your operations, how much ends up, actually reaching the market? Where, how much ends up kind of getting lost in transit and in the distribution system today? And how much do you guys, have to eat on your field if it goes bad or something like that?
Well, I think the technology is coming in. I'm farming in Central Valley of California. I'm only 100 miles from Silicon Valley. We got grad students coming out and people coming out all the time ready to write an app.
A new gadget.
That farms for me. They all think they got it all figured out. So, but we have GPS on tractors. We're doing all kinds of technology. I am working with somebody on an app that's going to do a lot of record keeping, and I have so many reports I have to send into the state government now. It's just amazing, and so this is going to help me organize data. The data we have to collect now is just beyond what we even dreamed of 10 years ago. So we're looking at technology for some of these things, and there's new technology right out in the field. There's new planting systems that are coming on that are very high tech that we're looking at. But I want to come back a little bit to the point about really how we decide what to grow. We can look at government's incentives and disincentives, but you really can't get very far from the true market. If you get very far from the true market, it won't work. We have to really look at what works in our areas, and we can tweak it a little bit, but we have to be very, very careful to stay where it needs to be. And the true way that I think the influential people that are at a conference like this can change what farmers grow is to educate consumers. When Mark Bittman tells farmers what they should be growing, I find that that's offensive. His skill is at telling consumers how to eat better, convincing people how to eat better, because the change should be drawn from the consumer side. It shouldn't be forced upon us from the government side. We will grow what the markets are,
Well,
exactly
that's
what
what
they
Adam's
are.
saying, yeah.
We will not be planting something that's not sold. If nobody buys anything with high fructose corn syrups, there won't be any made in this country. But if you tell us we can't make any in this country, but people still want it, it will just come on ships from Brazil. So we need to have it from the consumer side to draw the healthier foods, the healthier choices. That's what we will grow.
Okay. All right, one more, because I'm already out of time and I'm going to get slaughtered.
Ricardo, this question is for you. With policy so affected by scientific research and academic research as well, there's clearly a pitfall on your end to be able to give stern policy recommendations, or you need to do this, you need to do that. But how do you see your position, I guess, bridging the gap to finding these partnerships and like engaging these relationships with farmers in order to kind of create that dynamic moving forward?
Yeah, if I understood the initial premise of your question, I think that our policy is insufficiently informed by science. Our policies actually don't reflect what the science would make possible these days. And actually, it's a shame that we're getting to this point in the conversation when this is done. Because there actually is a case that I'd be really curious to know, and maybe we can just go offline and have a conversation, those of you that are interested. There is a case in the corn-soy system of the Midwest. You won't find a bigger fan of corn than I am, for reasons I won't get into here, but there's a case for that being a market that was saturated a long, long time ago, and we continue to support policies for overproduction and then inventing uses for the surplus, which is a real distortion of the market. Now, there's all kinds of social reasons and political reasons for that. But I will note that, and of course, we're doing this at a time that's really late for people who really have different perspectives on this, probably.
Sorry. Well, thank you all very, very much. Brave guys.